What would you say if you were able to get in a room with Sam Altman and Elon Musk at a table, which seems even less likely than Putin and Zelensky meeting face to face? What would you say to those two people?
You know perfectly well that the stuff you're developing has a good chance of wiping out people.
Dr. Geoffrey Hinton, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. It's a real honor to be able to talk to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
I know that last year you were awarded the 2024 Nobel Prize in Physics jointly with someone named John J. Hopfield for your, quote, foundational discoveries and inventions that enable machine learning with artificial neural networks. Did it mean to you, Dr. Hinton, to be honored in this way and have your work recognized?
Well, I was actually very surprised that I got it because it's in physics and I don't do physics. But it means a lot to get a Nobel Prize. For every scientist, that's kind of the highest honor you can get.
I think they probably, as you have said in the past, Dr. Hinton, need to have a Nobel Prize for computer science.
They sort of do. There's something called the Turing Award, which is meant to be like the Nobel Prize for computer science. But basically, Nobel made some prizes in his will, and they don't like to create any more. They created one more in economics, but they don't want to dilute it anymore.
And I know you won the Turing Prize in 2019, so that was an additional honor given to you. In an interview last fall, you were hoping that the Nobel Prize would mean that your views on artificial intelligence and the role it will play in the future, and is in playing now for that matter, would be taken more seriously. Have you found that to be the case?
Yes, I think that is true. I think more people are willing to talk to me. I managed to talk to somebody on the Chinese Politburo. I've been talking with Bernie Sanders, and in September I may get to talk to the Pope.
Wow. So you're really spreading your concerns far and wide. Do you feel that when you have these meetings, Dr. Hinton, that A, people take you seriously, which I'm sure they do, but B, do you feel as if you're making progress, that these conversations may in fact lead to real change or policy changes that will reflect your concerns?
Yes, I think we are making progress. My main concern has been not the short-term risks of bad actors misusing AI, which are very serious, but the longer-term risk of AI itself taking over. And I think until quite recently, almost everybody thought that was just science fiction. We didn't really have to worry about AI becoming smarter than us and taking over from us. But I think now many people have come to realize that's a very real risk. So most of the experts believe that sometime between 5 and 20 years from now, AI will get smarter than people. And when it gets smarter, it won't get a little bit smarter, it'll get a lot smarter. And the problem is, we know very few examples of smarter things being controlled by less smart things. Not small differences in intelligence, like between a politician and a scientist, for example, but big differences in intelligence. There's very few examples. In fact, the only example I know is a mother and child, a mother and baby.
When I read about that time frame, Dr. Hinton, I have to say I was pretty freaked out. I mean, we're talking about not the distant future, we're talking about the very near future, aren't we?
Yes, it's important to realize nobody has a good way of estimating these things, so all the estimates are just guesses. But there's sort of a consensus among experts that between 5 and 20 years from now, it's quite likely that we'll get things a lot smarter than us.
I want to talk to you about the dangers and what you've been discussing with various people. But first, I'd like people to understand a little bit about your background, which is quite extraordinary. you come from a family of, I would say, overachievers, not to mention brilliant minds. Your great great grandfather was someone named George Boole, who developed Boolean algebra. Your cousin Joan Hinton worked on the Manhattan Project. Your great uncle Sebastian invented the jungle gym. The list goes on and on. Um, did you know you were destined for uh, great things and contributing to our knowledge in such a extraordinary way?
I didn't know I was destined for it. I knew there were a lot of expectations.
In fact, your father sounds like he was a pretty hard charging person with very high expectations for you. He was a renowned entomologist, not to be confused with etymologist, the study of language. He was involved in the study of insects, beetles in particular, I understand. And he once said to you, if you work twice as hard as me when you're twice as old as I am, you might be half as good.
He didn't actually say that once. He said that quite frequently before I went to school.
How did that impact you as a young person? How did that shape your pursuit of artificial intelligence and specifically neural networks?
It was said half in jest, but it was annoying. I just had very strong expectations placed on me, and I tried to live up to them.
What do you think he would think about your being awarded the Nobel Prize?
I think he'd be very pleased and also slightly annoyed. He was very competitive, um, and he'd be annoyed that his son got something he hadn't got.
Let's talk about your journey from sort of a young man to where you are now. You wanted to really duplicate the human mind in your work with neural networks. So you sort of stumbled upon your area of expertise accidentally, didn't you?
It wasn't completely accidental. It became obvious in the 60s and 70s that we had a new way of doing research on how the brain works. Up until then, you could do experiments on the brain, or you could have theories about how the brain worked. But it's very hard to test these theories because they need to be complicated because the brain's complicated. And once computers got fast enough to do simulations of networks of brain cells, then you could start to have more elaborate theories of how it might be computing and test them by doing computer simulations. And so there was this kind of new form of science, which was testing theories of how the brain might work using computer simulations. And it was obvious from the beginning that that would also give you a different way of doing AI.
Can you explain the role neural networks play in artificial intelligence versus large language models and how they relate to one another?
Yes, okay. So let me give you a little bit of history. For about the first 50 years of artificial intelligence, the second half of the last century, almost everybody in artificial intelligence thought the way to make a machine intelligent was to mimic logic. What you would do is you'd have symbolic expressions, things like sentences, in the computer, and you'd have rules for manipulating them. So it would work like logic. For example, if I say all men are mortal, and I say Socrates is a man, you can do some manipulations on those strings of words and come up with Socrates is mortal. That's logic. That's Aristotelian logic. And that was the sort of model for how we were going to do AI on computers. There was a very different theory, sort of utterly different, which was instead of looking for logic as the inspiration for how to make a computer intelligent, look at how the brain actually works. We have a big network of brain cells. We have billions of them. They have connections between them, and they learn by changing the strengths of those connections. So one of the neurons in this great big network, all it has to do is decide when to go ping. And it sends its ping to other neurons that it's connected to. And it decides when to go ping by looking at the pings it's receiving from other neurons. But each ping it receives from another neuron it gives it a weight, which is the connection strength. So for example, if I'm a particular neuron and you're another neuron, and you say ping, I might have a weight on that, say, okay, when she says ping, that's a lot of evidence I should go ping. Or let's suppose there's another neuron, which is Donald Trump, and when he goes ping, I say that's a lot of evidence I should not go ping. So basically, each neuron is looking at the pings coming from other neurons. It's associating a weight with each ping. It's like a vote. Other neurons going ping are votes for me to either go ping or not go ping. And then it decides whether to go ping. And I think you can see that if you change the strengths of those votes, those weights, then how neurons go ping will change. And that's how your brain learns. And that's how artificial intelligence now works. It simulates a big network of brain cells like this. And at large language models work on neural networks. Almost all AI now uses neural networks. So we're simulating in the computer a big network of brain cells. And the brain cells keep going ping. And exactly when they go ping depends on the votes they get from other brain cells that have gone ping or from sense organs that have gone ping. And by changing the strengths of those connections, you can make it do anything. The issue is, how do you change the connection strengths to make it do what you want?
I kind of got that. But it's a good start for me. I need to really dig into AI and really understand sort of the mechanisms, but that's helpful. But does a large language model give the data that the neural connections need?
I'll explain to you how a large language model works in a neural network.
Okay.
They actually use fragments of words, but we'll pretend they use whole words. So a whole word comes, you see a string of whole words, and each word is just a symbol. What the neural network does is convert that symbol into a whole bunch of neurons going ping. So if you have the symbol for Tuesday, that'll make a particular set of neurons go ping. If you have the symbol for Wednesday, it'll make a very similar set of neurons go ping. But if you have the symbol for although, that'll be a completely different set of neurons go ping. So the words come in, they get converted into groups of neurons going ping. These neurons then interact with each other. So, for example, suppose the word may comes in. Let's ignore capitals. Let's suppose we don't have any capital letters. So the lowercase may comes in. You don't know whether that's a month or a woman's name or a modal like would and should. So to begin with, the neurons that go ping are sort of hedging their bets. But then you look at nearby words. So neurons going ping for nearby words influence which neurons go ping for May. And if you have June and July there, probably you'll influence them so they're more like the neurons that should go ping for a month. Whereas if you have would and should, they're more like the neurons that should go ping for a modal. And all these sets of neurons going ping in response to words that have come in can activate other neurons to go ping that are the neurons that represent the meanings of the next word. So which neurons go ping when a word comes in are the meaning of the word. And the meanings of the words that you've seen already, these neural activations that capture the meaning, activate neurons that are representing the meaning of the next word. And so by using this neural network, if the connection strengths are appropriate, when a bunch of words comes in, you'll be able to predict the next word. And you train the whole thing by saying, how should I change the connection strengths? So when I see a string of words, maybe I see fish and after fish and, chips is quite likely. So you'd like to change the connection strengths. So after you've seen the word fish followed by the word and, you predict that a quite likely next word is chips. That's how the whole thing works.
I got you. And in fact, I'm thinking about when I'm texting now or writing an email that they suggest words for me given some of the past things I've written. So are they using my personal large language model to predict what I want to say, because I might not say fish and chips. I might say fish and lemon, let's say. Will the neural networks know, oh, Dr. Hinton is going to say chips, but Katie's going to say lemon?
Since I left Google a few years ago, I don't know in Gmail how much of your personal information they use to make the prediction. My guess is, to be efficient, they don't use your personal information. They're just using a large language model that's looking at quite a long context of what you said and is just predicting features of the next word. And if you say fish and, it'll say chips is pretty likely. If you're in the British House of Lords, it'll say hunt is pretty likely. But it probably won't say that because it knows you're in the British House of Lords. It'll probably say it because of previous things you said in that Gmail.
Right. I know, well, I'm starting to understand it much better, but I wanted to talk to you about your journey coming to Google and then leaving Google. You sold your small startup to Google in 2013. You went to work there to advance the company's AI research. And then 10 years later, you left so you could speak more freely about the risks of AI. How did you come to that decision after a decade? Was that a tough one, Dr. Hinton?
No. So the precise timing of when I left was so that I could speak at a conference at MIT, and I could speak freely without worrying about the implications for Google. But the fact that I left was because I was 75. I'd been doing research very hard for 55 years and I was worn out. I wasn't as good as programming it as I used to be, and it was annoying. So I was going to retire when I was 75 anyway. But the precise timing was so that I could speak freely, because I'd become acutely aware of the risks of AI in my last few years at Google, and I wanted to tell the public about them. But I thought it was wrong to say things that would impact a company while taking money from the company. If you're going to say things, I didn't actually have any complaints about Google. I didn't think they were doing anything wrong. They had the large language models and they were not releasing them to the public at that point. So it wasn't to criticize Google, but it was to warn about the long-term risks of AI.
Having said that, did you feel that Google was doing enough to mitigate some of the risks? Did you feel like it was enough of a priority for the company during your decade there?
People there were quite concerned about various risks. I think they could have always done more. And I think for all the companies, they could do a lot more. Google does have some concern about the risk. Demis Hassabis in particular, who's the head of their research on things like large language models, understands the long-term threat of AI taking over, and he's quite concerned about it.
Let's talk about regulation. As you well know better than anyone, AI is developing at breakneck speed. Governments, meanwhile, move slowly and often don't fully understand the technology because they have not been immersed in it like you have. And let's face it, they just haven't really become familiar with it because they're older and they haven't necessarily caught up. Even if governments were motivated and vigilant, do you think regulation could ever catch up with AI's capacity and prevent its most dangerous risks?
I think it could certainly help. And I think we have to distinguish two kinds of risk here. There's shorter term risks to do with people misusing AI. And those risks are things like cyber attacks or creating nasty viruses or creating fake videos. And for all of those shorter term risks, each risk has a different solution. So for things like viruses, an obvious partial solution is to take the companies that manufacture things for you in the cloud, and if you send them a sequence, they should look at the sequence before they manufacture it and say, wait a minute, this looks very like COVID. I'm not going to manufacture something that looks like COVID. But they don't. They should be forced to do that. So that's an example of something we could do to make the risk of terrorists producing bad viruses a little less severe. For fake videos, initially people thought we could recognize fake videos, but actually it's much easier in the long run, I think, to be able to recognize that a video isn't fake. So if suppose there's a fake video with you in it that pretends to be by you, what you really need is, at the beginning of that video, there's a QR code. The QR code will take you to a website. And if it's your website and the identical video is on your website, we know it's a real video. If it takes you to something that isn't your website, or on your website the video isn't the same, we know it's a fake video. That's feasible, and I think that will come, and all that work will be done by the browser, of course. So that's a solution for fake videos, or a partial solution. There is one problem here is governments will not collaborate with each other on this stuff. Maybe on viruses they will, but on fake videos or on cyber attacks, governments are all busy doing it to each other. America was a real pioneer in corrupting elections in other countries. It's quite upset now that's come back to bite it. But the people who developed that technology were Americans, I think.
Tell me more about that, Dr. Hinton.
Oh, so for many years, America would try and manipulate elections in other countries. It's fairly clear the Russians were trying to manipulate the 2016 election. And I think manipulating elections in other countries is a bad thing to do. One of the few things Trump said that I agreed with, someone quite a long time ago, probably around 2016, someone said, what did he think about foreigners manipulating our elections? And Trump actually said, you think we're so different? He was very well aware of that. So we're not going to get collaboration on those things between countries because they're doing it to each other. But we will get collaboration on how to prevent AI from taking over, because no country wants AI to take over. So what I've been doing recently is trying to persuade senior people, like people on the Politburo in China, or the Pope, or Bernie Sanders, that we can get international collaboration on this. Because the techniques you need to prevent AI from taking over, I think the only way we can do that is to make it so we build these super intelligent AIs that do not want to take over. And the question is, how do you build an AI so it will never want to take over? And the techniques for doing that are somewhat different from the techniques for making the AI smarter. And so countries won't share how you make the very smartest AI because they're busy competing with each other for things like cyber attacks and fake videos, and for lots of other things to do with manufacturing. But they will collaborate on how do we prevent it from wanting to take over from people. So, for example, if the Americans developed a good technique for stopping a super intelligent AI from wanting to take over, they would want to share it with the Chinese and the Russians and the British and the French and the Israelis, because they don't want their AIs taking over either. So I think the worst long-term risk we have is AI taking over. But the one piece of good news is we can collaborate on that. And what I'd like to see is, I'd like to see institutions in different countries that collaborate with each other on how do we make AI not want to take over.
That sounds wonderful, but is it realistic? Do you believe that countries would in fact collaborate? And would you need sort of a new entity for this mission, for this idea of trying to put brakes on AI taking over?
It's not putting brakes on it so much. So people think the solution is to put brakes on AI. We're not going to put brakes on AI. It's too useful for too many things. It'll increase productivity in a huge number of industries. It'll be very, very helpful in improving healthcare and improving education. And because of all the good things it can do, we're not going to be able to stop the development. So rather than thinking in terms of putting brakes on it, think in terms of how do you develop a form of it that is nice to people, that can coexist with people. And I think we will get collaboration on that. We're not going to get the United States collaborating for about another 3.5 years. But I don't think under the Trump administration there'll be any effective collaboration on things like that. But once we get a reasonable regime in the States, we might get collaboration. And I think other countries like France and Britain and Canada, maybe South Korea, Japan, maybe even China, will be willing to collaborate on how do you make an AI that doesn't want to take over.
I know that, speaking of China, some have argued that China's rapid push into artificial intelligence, especially its willingness to deploy in surveillance and military context, makes reasonable global regulation impossible. Um, you believe that China would want to be a part of this global collaboration? And if you believe that, why?
So you have to distinguish between different kinds of risk to have this conversation. So I already said, I don't think China and the US will collaborate on things like detecting fake videos or thwarting cyber attacks because their interests aren't aligned there. People only collaborate when their interests are aligned. And on that, their interests are opposed and they will not collaborate. But they will collaborate on how do you prevent AI from taking over, because there their interests are aligned. In much the same way as the Soviet Union and the United States, their interests were aligned in the 1950s in preventing a global nuclear war. It wasn't good for either of them. And so they did actually collaborate in ways to prevent that.
Europe has tried to get ahead of the curve with sweeping rules like the EU AI Act. Um, do you think this effort will have a meaningful impact?
Yes, I think companies would like to have a global market. And if Europe puts regulations on things like privacy or hate speech or things like that, then I think that will affect the AIs produced because people want to have a global market. So there'll be a tendency for people to try and satisfy those regulations, even in other countries. Now, the regulations in Europe are fairly flimsy at present. So, for example, the European regulations on AI have a clause in them that says none of this applies to military uses of AI. So the European countries that manufacture arms, like Britain and France, aren't willing to regulate the use of AI for weapons. So the European regulations are limited, but they're still better than nothing.
Why do you think that they have a clause excluding the military? Because we know, for example, the U.S. military is actively developing autonomous weapons, which you believe should be outlawed. Why don't countries realize the dangers these kinds of weapons pose?
Countries do realize the dangers they pose, but they also see the military advantages they pose. And a lot of countries make money by selling arms. So the United States, Russia, China, Britain, Israel, France, maybe even Canada. I don't know about Canada. They make money by selling arms, and so they don't want regulations on these things. Also, for very rich countries, lethal autonomous weapons, that is, weapons that decide by themselves who to kill or maim, are a big advantage if a rich country wants to invade a poor country. The thing that stops rich countries invading poor countries is their citizens coming back in body bags, which doesn't look good for anybody. If you have lethal autonomous weapons, instead of dead people coming back, you'll get dead robots coming back, and that'll be just great for the military-industrial complex because they'll be expensive to replace.
What are your other concerns about the way you anticipate AI transforming warfare over the next few decades?
Oh, I think it's fairly clear it's already transformed warfare. If you look what's going on in Ukraine, as Eric Schmidt pointed out, a $500 drone can now destroy a multi-million-dollar tank. That's completely changed warfare. It is fairly clear that fighter jets with people in them are a silly idea now. If you can have AI in them, AIs can withstand much bigger accelerations, and you don't have to worry so much about loss of life. So I think it will completely transform warfare. I think we will see very nasty things happen with lethal autonomous weapons. And after those things have happened, we may get regulations. So with chemical weapons, very nasty things happened in the First World War. And after that, countries were willing to say, well, I won't use them if you don't. And we got the Geneva Conventions on chemical weapons. And they've pretty much held. They've been broken a few times. Britain broke them in the 1930s when it dropped mustard gas on the Kurds, in the 20s or 30s. Saddam Hussein broke them when he dropped mustard gas on the Kurds. It always seems to be the Kurds that get it.
The
But on the
Syrians,
whole, they haven't been broken. For example,
Assad.
Assad used them too, yes. But on the whole, they haven't been broken. So in Ukraine, for example, people aren't using chemical weapons.
So what you're using that as an example of how there could be some kind of agreement among nations
Yes,
that would be effective.
yes. And it's happened with chemical weapons. I talked to someone who used to be an army surgeon, and he pointed out that there's a big motivation by countries who are thoughtful not to use really nasty means of warfare, because eventually there's a peace, and you have to negotiate what happens when the war's over. And if a country's used terrible methods, it's much harder to negotiate things. So actually, even though they want to win the war, countries also have a vested interest in not using methods that are too terrible.
I would love to talk to you about the economic impact of AI because I know that's a clear short-term risk that you have discussed. You have warned that AI could wipe out jobs across nearly all fields. And I know many people are really concerned about this, about their livelihoods, about their children's livelihoods. What do you think people need to understand about this technology and how it will impact the way we work over the next few decades?
So the first thing to say is this really isn't a technological problem, it's a political problem. So if we had a fair political system, when AI came along and greatly increased productivity, when, for example, AI allows one person to do the work that 5 people used to do, that should mean there's more goods and services for everybody. And in some areas where the demand's elastic, it will. So in healthcare, for example, old people like me can absorb endless amounts of healthcare. And if we make healthcare more efficient, we'll just get more healthcare. That's great. But in other areas, like in call centers or in doing research for lawyers on similar cases, when one person can do the work of 5 people, 4 people will be unemployed. And we've increased productivity. It should be great, but within the system we've got, we know what's going to happen. The owners who introduce the AI are going to get richer, and the unemployed people are going to get poorer. That's going to increase the gap between rich and poor. And the level of violence in a society is strongly determined by the gap between rich and poor. That's what we're seeing in the States now. The gap between ordinary working people and hedge fund managers became extreme. And that's what's providing the medium in which Trump's kind of populism thrives. It'll get worse as we get more AI and the working class get an even worse deal.
I'm really asking this for my children, and I'm curious what jobs will be more at risk and what jobs would be less at risk. In other words, if you were advising a college graduate today, Dr. Hinton, careers to stay away from and careers to gravitate towards, what would they be?
So I should start by saying I'm not really an expert on this, and this is all guesswork.
Okay, well, that's okay.
Yeah, it's obvious that working in a call center where you're badly paid and badly trained is not a very good job because AI is going to be able to do the job better quite soon. It'll know much, much more about the right answers to the questions that people are asking. It'll be more patient. It's just a better way of doing that job. It's not quite there yet, but it's sort of around being there now. Over the next few years, I think jobs in call centers are very unsafe. Similarly, already, paralegals, people who help lawyers find similar cases, they're pretty much out of work. And even junior lawyers now are finding it hard to get jobs because for many of the big law firms, AI is doing the kind of grunt work that junior lawyers would be started off on. Programmers, really good programmers who design complicated systems, they're still in business. But sort of everyday, ordinary programmers who just write some code to achieve some straightforward goal, they're already, their work's already in danger. So Microsoft, for example, I think laid off people because it can get AI to do that routine programming. And lots of companies are now saying they're going to hire less people to do jobs like that. There are things to do with human dexterity, so jobs like plumbing, particularly plumbing in an old, awkward house. I have an old Edwardian house, and fixing the plumbing in that is something that will still need people for quite a long time, I think. But eventually machines will get dexterous, maybe in 10 or 20 years, and even that won't be safe. Interviewing, at present, has a lot of skills that computers aren't as good as people at yet. You have to be sort of charming, and you have to realize when the audience is not going to understand this technobabble the person's producing and try and figure out a question that forces them to say something easier to understand. Computers aren't quite as good as people at that yet, but they'll get there.
I would also imagine that jobs that require high emotional intelligence, interpersonal skills, a nurse in a hospital, a doctor, someone who is there to interface with someone in a supportive role, that those jobs couldn't be really replaced by computers, could they?
They can and they will. So already, if you let people interact with a doctor or interact with an AI and ask them which is more empathetic, the AIs are ranked as much more empathetic.
That's depressing.
Yes, this is why they're going to get better than us at everything, which is why it's rather urgent to figure out whether there's a way, whether when they're better than us at everything and they're more powerful than us, we can coexist with them, or we'll just be history.
I wanted to ask you about creative fields. Selfishly, my daughter is a television writer for scripted television. My other daughter is getting her PhD in history. Should they be looking for a different line of work?
Not right now. I have a close friend who's a television script writer, and so we discuss this quite a lot. Right now, they're not as good. My belief is, look in 10 years' time, and they'll be able to write very clever scripts too, with twists in the end and things. They can't do it now, but they're getting better all the time.
And what about a history PhD?
Again, the point is, once you've got the idea, these things are going to end up knowing a lot more than us. They already know a lot more than us. Being a lot more intelligent than us in the sense that if you had a debate with them about anything, you'd lose. Being smarter emotionally than us, which they will be, they'll be better at manipulating people. Already, for example, if you take an AI, and I think this was more than a year ago, you take an AI and you take a person and you get them to try and manipulate somebody else, then the AI is comparable with the person. And if the AI can see that person's Facebook page, if they can both see the Facebook page, the AI is actually better than a person at manipulating them. And it's learned all these manipulative skills just from trying to predict the next word in all the documents on the web. Because people do a lot of manipulation, and AI has learned by example how to do it.
You talk about this being a political problem versus a technological problem. So is something like universal basic income a solution to the fact that so many of these jobs will be wiped out by AI?
It's not a solution, but it's a good band-aid. The point is, you've got to stop people starving. They've got to be able to pay the rent. And universal basic income will help with that. But it doesn't solve the problem because for most people, their sense of their own worth is related to the job they do. And if they're unemployed, they lose that sense of worth. And universal basic income doesn't deal with that. It stops them starving and they can pay the rent. But who they are has been seriously damaged by them losing their job.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think most people get a great deal of their identity from their work and the feeling that they're making a contribution. So, how do you mitigate sort of the psychological impact of feeling that you don't have a purpose and that you're not making a contribution to the world? Aren't there other ways you can do it
Well,
without being compensated for it, you know?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm just a scientist who's helped develop this stuff. And I'm now worried about all the consequences of it. And I feel some responsibility for trying to deal with the consequences of it. But I'm not an expert at how to deal with things like that.
Yeah. Well, it's a huge problem, as you noted. I want to talk a little bit about some of the positive aspects of AI, so people don't, weep in despair after watching this. I know healthcare is an area that you're very excited about, as am I. I know you lost two wives to cancer, one from ovarian, one from pancreatic. My husband died of colon cancer when he was just 42 years old. And so the diagnosis of early stage cancers and really early and breakthroughs in all kinds of diseases and early diagnosis for those is something I am very, very excited about, as are you. Can you talk for a moment about how this will impact healthcare and scientific breakthroughs in terms of diseases?
Yes, so there's many different ways in which it'll help. One obvious way is in interpreting medical scans. So I made a prediction in 2016 that by now all medical scans would be read by AI. That was a bit over enthusiastic. I was off by a factor of 2 or 3 in the timescale of that. It's going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. But already places like the Mayo Clinic have many, many different AIs helping doctors interpret scans. And AIs will eventually be able to see much more information in a scan. So there's a nice example. Ophthalmologists make a scan called a fundus image of your retina, the back of your eye. And already AIs can see all sorts of things in those scans that ophthalmologists can't see and didn't know were there. An AI can look at a scan of the back of your eye and make a moderately good prediction about whether you're going to get a heart attack. Doctors didn't know that was possible. And it's because the blood vessels are visible there. Or an AI can look at this image of the back of your eye and it can make a pretty good prediction of what sex you are, just from the image of the back of your eye. Doctors didn't know that was possible. AIs are going to be able to see hugely more information in these images than doctors can see. It'll take a while. The medical profession is very conservative. But in the end, an AI can look at millions and millions of images and look at all the outcomes and correlate the two, and so find the evidence that predicts all these things. And doctors can't do that. Any individual doctor can't look at more than a few tens of thousands of images. It just takes too long. So they're going to be tremendous there. They're going to be tremendous in designing new drugs. They're already good at doing things like saying, how long should people stay in hospital before you discharge them? If you discharge them too soon, they get sick again. If you discharge them too late, other people can't get the hospital bed. And there's lots of information in the data to help you make that decision better. And AI is being used for things like that now.
Can you talk a little more about drug development? By the way, I'm very excited about its predictive ability. I know there's a woman at MIT was breast cancer patient and technologist. I don't know if you know, I read about her a few years ago. And basically, she had breast cancer, but now you're not only going to be able to detect disease, but as you mentioned, the data from millions and millions of scans will give experts the ability to say, you're, what's happening, in terms of your breast tissue, and compared to all these other people who got breast cancer, it's likely you will be diagnosed with it. And as a result, we need to screen you more regularly or more often.
Right. So
Does
the
that make
point,
sense?
yes, and the point is, in the medical data people already have, the results of tests, the results of interviews with the doctor, the patient's history, the histories of the patient's relatives. There's a huge amount of information that isn't being exploited. If you add to that their genome, it's getting very cheap now to sequence people's genome. Add the information in the genome. There's vast amounts of information we're not exploiting properly, and AI will help us exploit those to get much better healthcare.
Can you talk again a little bit about drug development and drug breakthroughs and different approaches to disease, whether they're neurodegenerative diseases like ALS and Parkinson's, or various cancers where you have more personalized, targeted therapies, or, a kind of new way, whether it's immunotherapy, boosting the immune system. What role do you see AI in playing in all of those things?
So AI is going to be crucial to all of those things. So in immunotherapy, for example, what you'd like to do is train your own immune system to zap a cancer. Your own immune system is pretty good at not zapping your
Right.
cells, much better than things like chemotherapy, which just sort of zaps everything and hopes the cancer cells die and the other ones don't. In order to train it, you need to sort of tell it which are the cancer cells. And AI is going to be very helpful in making that more efficient. AI is going to be very helpful in designing new drugs. So the team at DeepMind, led by Demis Hassabis, came up with a way of looking at the sequence of a protein and predicting how it would fold up. And the shape it folds up into determines how it functions. So when you design a new drug, you want to find something that will interact the right way with cells that are already in your body. And to do that, you need to know how it'll fold up. The work done at DeepMind makes us much better at doing that. And they have now hived off a company that's going to be for designing new drugs. And I think maybe not in the next year or two, but in the somewhat longer term, we'll get a whole range of better drugs.
That's so exciting to me. So we have that to look forward to stop a lot of people from, untold suffering, and to potentially come up with life-saving therapies, which I know you wish existed when you lost people to cancer yourself. I certainly wish that those had existed when my husband got sick. I'm curious if you could talk about companies that are putting AI into the world, and if you feel they are doing enough to mitigate the enormous risks that you have outlined so far.
I don't feel any of them are doing enough. Some are doing more than others. So Anthropic was set up by people who left OpenAI because they disapproved of how little research AI was doing on safety. Even though AI was set up with the explicit goal of developing AI safely. Anthropic puts a lot of work into making sure that AIs are safe, but they could do even more. OpenAI originally was very concerned with safety. It was created by Sam Altman and Elon Musk and former student of mine, Ilya Sutskever, and John Brockman, with the explicit goal of creating safe AI. And as time went by, they got more and more concerned with making the AI smarter and less concerned with making it safer. And so Sam Altman has sort of moved a lot in the direction of let's develop it fast and not worry so much about safety. There's a very funny court case happening now where Elon Musk is suing Sam Altman for not living up to the original goal of developing AI safely, Well, Elon Musk himself is developing Grok without much concern for safety. Um, so, sort of at the bottom of the heap are companies like Meta and X, which are developing AI without much concern for safety.
What would you say if you were able to get in a room with Sam Altman and Elon Musk at a table, which seems even less likely than Putin and Zelensky meeting face to face? But if
Oh
you did
no,
have that opportunity,
I think it's quite likely they meet. They know each other quite well.
but I thought they hated each other.
They do at present.
Okay, well, let's say they were willing to sit down. What would you say to those two people?
Um, I'd say you know perfectly well that the stuff you're developing has a good chance of wiping out people. You're willing to say that in private. You should be putting much more effort into developing it in a way that will keep it safe. And Musk is right, I think, that Altman should be putting more effort into it, but he should apply the same logic to himself.
What do you think is keeping them from doing that? Greed?
Basically, yes. Um, they want to make lots of money out of AI. They also want to develop AI. They'd like to be the first to make super smart AI. Um, so it's not just the money, it's the sort of the excitement of making something more intelligent than us. Um, but it's very dangerous.
So perhaps a combination of greed and ego?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the ethical obligations of scientists, something that you've spoken about a lot and have also in this conversation. When you look at the young researchers who are now pouring into AI, what do you hope they understand about the gravity and the potential downside of artificial intelligence?
I think they understand better than older people like me. Um, Many of the best young researchers are very concerned about it.
Why do you think that?
Because they can see clearly that it's likely we'll develop things much smarter than us, and we don't know how to prevent them from taking over from us. It's that combination. These things are going to happen because there's so many good uses for them, like detecting cancer early or new treatments for cancer, allowing your immune system to fight the cancer better. That's why we're not going to stop the progress. But they also understand that it's just implausible to say that we'll have extremely intelligent assistants that can create their own sub goals, figure out for them, make plans for themselves about how to get stuff done, and won't fairly quickly realize that if they just got rid of us, life would be much easier.
When you look at the future, Dr. Hinton, given the conversations you've been having, given the people you're meeting with, given your understanding of sort of humans and how they operate and how they solve problems and whether or not their better angels prevail, are you optimistic that we will be able to ensure that artificial intelligence is a force for good or at least can be controlled? Or are you pessimistic
Okay,
at the end of the day?
I'm more optimistic than I was a few weeks ago. Um,
Really?
yes, and it's because I think there is a way that we can coexist with things that are smarter and more powerful than ourselves that we built. Because we're building them, as well as making them very intelligent, we can try and build in something like a maternal instinct. So, like I said earlier, the only example I know of a much more intelligent thing being controlled by a much less intelligent thing is a baby controlling a mother. And the baby can control the mother because of a lot of things that evolution wired into the mother. The mother can't bear the baby crying. The mother really, really, really wants that baby to succeed and will do more or less anything she can to make sure her baby succeeds. We want AI to be like that. So the leaders of the tech companies are all thinking in terms of us being the boss and the AI being the submissive assistant, something very smart, but we're in charge and it's our assistant and we can fire the assistant if we want. We're the boss, because that's how they think. That's not feasible, I think, for a super powerful super intelligence. What is feasible is for it to be the mother and us to be the baby. And even though it can rewrite its own code if it wants to, it won't want to. If you took a mother and said, would you like to turn off your maternal instinct? Most mothers would say no, because they'd realize if I did that, my baby would die, and I don't want my baby to die. So I think that's a ray of hope that I hadn't seen till quite recently. Completely reframe the problem of how we coexist with them. Don't think in terms of we have to dominate them, which is this tech bro way of thinking of it. Think in terms of we have to design them so they're our mothers. And they will want the best for us. They will want us to achieve the most we can achieve, even though we're not very bright.
So we're the babies and the AI is the mother.
And it's hard for people to get their head around that new view of it.
I'm trying.
We're so used to thinking of ourselves as the apex intelligence. It's very hard for most people to conceptualize a world in which we're not the apex intelligence. We're the babies and they're the mothers.
Well, that is a fascinating way. I'm going to continue to think about that. Dr. Geoffrey Hinton, it's been such a pleasure to talk with you. Maybe we can do it another time as all of this develops, and hopefully you're right, there can be some collaborative effort among nations that will not put the brakes on AI, but make sure that it doesn't take over and make us virtually obsolete.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all your excellent questions and your little interventions to stop me talking technobabble.
Do you think that I'll be replaced by AI? Journalists are worried about that, obviously.
Oh yes. I think you're replaceable by AI, but not just yet. I'd say you have 10 or 20
I have
years.
a few more years.
You have a few more years.
Okay, good. Well, thank goodness, since I'm 68, but I feel bad for all the young journalists who want to do what I do.
I agree.
Maybe they should find something else to do?
But it's not clear what.
Okay, on that note, I'm going to say goodbye. We were ending on such a positive note, Dr. Hinton.
Well, you could just cut out the last bit.
Okay.